Story 1. Echoes of Obsession. In the small, secluded town of Whispering Pines, nestled deep within the shadowy embrace of an ancient forest, a tale whispered among the townsfolk spoke of a love twisted into madness. It was a story that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to listen. A cautionary tale of a man consumed by obsession and a love that refused to die. At the heart of this haunting legend was Emily Carter, a young woman with eyes like midnight and a smile that could light up the darkest of nights. Her beauty was the talk of the town, and many a suitor vied for her affections, but it was Jacob Hargrove who captured her heart. Jacob was a brooding figure with a past shrouded in mystery. His eyes held a darkness that seemed to call out to Emily, drawing her in like a moth to a flame. Their love burned bright at first, a passionate whirlwind that swept them both off their feet. But as the months passed, whispers began to circulate among the townsfolk. They spoke of how Jacob's love for Emily bordered on obsession, how he would follow her wherever she went, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity that unsettled even the bravest of souls. Emily, blinded by love, refused to see the warning signs. She brushed off the concerned looks and hushed whispers, convinced that Jacob's love for her was pure and true. It wasn't until the night of the Harvest Moon Festival that Emily began to realize the depth of Jacob's madness. The townsfolk had gathered in the town square, the air thick with the scent of bonfires and autumn leaves. Emily danced with the other villagers, her laughter ringing out like silver bells. But as the night wore on, she began to feel a prickle of unease at the back of her neck. She glanced around, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw Jacob standing at the edge of the square, his eyes locked on her with a fierce, possessive gaze. Ignoring the growing sense of dread in her chest, Emily continued to dance, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But every time she looked up, Jacob was there, his eyes never leaving her face. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Emily made her excuses and slipped away into the darkness of the surrounding forest. She thought she had lost Jacob in the shadows, but as she made her way deeper into the woods, she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. Panic gripped her heart as she realized she was being followed. She quickened her pace, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. But no matter how fast she ran, the footsteps behind her seemed to draw closer and closer. Finally, unable to run any longer, Emily turned to confront her pursuer. Her heart leaped into her throat as she saw Jacob standing before her, his eyes wild with madness. "Emily," he whispered, his voice a low, guttural growl. "You can't escape me. We were meant to be together forever." Terror seized Emily's heart as she realized the truth of Jacob's words. He had become consumed by his obsession, his love twisted into something dark and dangerous. She turned to flee, but it was too late. Jacob lunged forward, his hands closing around her throat with a vice-like grip. Emily struggled and fought, her screams echoing through the silent forest, but Jacob's grip only tightened. As the world began to fade to black, Emily saw the glint of madness in Jacob's eyes, and she knew that she would never escape him. Her last thought as consciousness slipped away was of the love that had turned to madness, a cautionary tale for all who dared to listen. In the days that followed, the townsfolk spoke of how Emily had disappeared into the forest, never to be seen again. Some whispered that she had run away to escape Jacob's madness, while others claimed that she had been taken by the forest itself, a warning to all who dared to defy its ancient power. But deep within the heart of the forest, among the whispering trees and the haunting echoes of lost souls, Emily's voice could still be heard, a ghostly whisper on the wind, a chilling reminder of a love that had turned to madness, echoing through the ages for all eternity. Story 2. Eternal Vows. In the dimly lit apartment on the edge of town, Sarah sat alone, her heart heavy with the weight of grief. It had been 6 months since the tragic death of her boyfriend Mark in a car accident that had shattered her world into a million jagged pieces. She had tried to move on, to pick up the shattered remnants of her life, but the specter of Mark's death haunted her every step. Desperate for a fresh start, Sarah had moved to a new town, hoping to leave the memories behind. She found solace in the arms of a kind-hearted man named Lucas, whose warm smile and gentle demeanor had helped to soothe her shattered soul. As their relationship blossomed, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope stir within her heart. Lucas was everything she had ever wanted in a partner, kind, loving, and endlessly patient with her grief. For the first time since Mark's death, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a future filled with happiness and love. But as the days turned into weeks, a shadow began to creep into Sarah's newfound happiness. It started with little things, a misplaced item, a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, things that she could easily dismiss as figments of her overactive imagination. But then the nightmares began. Night after night, Sarah was plagued by dreams of Mark, his face twisted in agony as he reached out to her with bloodied hands. She would wake in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest, only to find herself alone in the darkness of her apartment, At first, she tried to convince herself that it was just her grief playing tricks on her mind. But as the nightmares grew more vivid and more terrifying, Sarah began to suspect that something sinister was at play. One night, as she lay awake in bed, the air heavy with the suffocating weight of dread, Sarah heard it. A faint whispering voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "Sarah," it murmured, the voice dripping with malice and sorrow. "Why did you leave me, Sarah? Why did you let me die?" Frozen with fear, Sarah listened as the voice grew louder and more insistent, filling the room with its haunting lament. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, that she was still lost in the grip of a nightmare, but then she felt it, a cold, clammy hand closing around her wrist with a grip like ice. She tried to pull away to scream for help, but the unseen force held her fast, its touch sending shivers of terror down her spine. "Sarah," the voice whispered, its words a chilling echo of the love they had once shared. "I will never let you go. We made vows, Sarah, eternal vows." With a sudden surge of strength born of sheer terror, Sarah wrenched herself free from the icy grip and fled from the apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. She stumbled blindly through the darkened streets, the whispering voice echoing in her ears like a malevolent chant. Finally gasping for breath, Sarah found herself standing before the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the crumbling headstones and tangled weeds. As she stood there trembling and alone, Sarah felt a presence behind her, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to seep from the very earth itself. Turning slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah saw him. Mark, his face twisted with rage and sorrow, his eyes burning with a fierce, otherworldly light. "You left me, Sarah," he whispered, his voice a chilling echo of the love they had once shared. "You promised to love me forever, but you abandoned me to the darkness." Terror gripped Sarah's heart as she realized the truth of Mark's words. He had returned from beyond the grave, his love twisted into something dark and vengeful. With a primal scream of terror, Sarah turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the silent cemetery. But no matter how fast she ran, she could feel Mark's presence behind her, his cold, clammy touch closing in. Finally, with nowhere left to run, Sarah stumbled and fell to her knees before an ancient, weathered headstone. The name etched into the crumbling stone sent a shiver of dread down her spine. Mark Johnson, beloved son and cherished boyfriend. As she knelt there, trembling and alone, Sarah felt a cold, clammy hand close around her throat, squeezing the life from her with a grip like iron. "You promised, Sarah," Mark whispered, his voice a chilling echo in the darkness. "Eternal vows, Sarah. Forever and always." And as Sarah's vision faded to black, she knew that she would never escape the vengeful spirit of her dead ex-lover, doomed to spend eternity in the cold embrace of the grave, forever haunted by the echoes of a love twisted into madness, a cautionary tale for all who dared to defy the bonds of death itself.